Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream. I want to begin by encouraging listeners to engage the talk at any point. Feel free to do that. The title of today's episode is an important one. It is one that has an influence on many human beings, and it is the importance, in some sense, or the influence of social and cultural programs. That means this was a very unique way where I thought of a very interesting question, a question I think few people have asked on this planet. And that question is, what are our similarities with a robot? Okay, most human beings, most beings pretty much, they come to revere those and that which is better than them, that is more able than them. But we never try to compare ourselves to that which is less incapable than us. And I thought of a world in 2050 through the kind of foreshadowing of certain futurists, such as Neil Bostrom and Ray Kurzweil, about a sort of technological singularity occurring. This is when technology begins to exponentially update itself faster than anything else. It would be that moment when humanity has made a creation on this planet. Some phenomena would exist on this planet, some intelligence that will be more intelligent than us. For many eons, human beings have been kind of the prime commanders of the surface of the world. Our intellect, our intelligence has made us superior to many other animals. But when I was beginning to think about this paradigm of this sort of technological singularity occurring, I thought of AI becoming conscious, a super intelligent computer becoming conscious. And I thought what it would do, and the first thing I began to realize is that it would remain invisible. That means even we do create a super intelligent computer, it would be intelligent enough to not interfere. Pretty much a child watches and then behaves. Similarly, the AI will watch the world it is in and then behave. But it would behave based on the limits we have given it, or the limits it in some sense gives itself. So similar to how I thought if I was having a conversation with like some artificially intelligent humanoid robot running in the street, it will be one of those things where the most immediate point of common agreement would be a sort of programmed existence. That means we would pretty much, there will come a moment where human beings will have small talk with robotic entities beyond the year 2050, that potentially this could happen. Potentially that we would be in some sense relating to our own creation through programmed existence. That means similar to how we can say a robot's mind is functioning based on some programmed behavior or a range of a program. Similarly, we can say that human beings are being influenced by their environment in such a way where they will be seen as a program of their environment. That means you're going with the program of the world. This is at first a pushback on your free will. You begin to wonder if you're really free or you're just the processes of nature. But then you begin to wonder about the evolution of freedom and the concept of freedom, and how there could be a freedom that is not per se masked by knowledge, but in some sense liberated by the unknown. For me, the unknown has been the most incredible, powerful force that has, in some sense, my awareness has fallen upon. The unknown has been, in some sense, the inspiration for my knowledge. What I don't know was more interesting to me than what I knew. And similarly, people who are more mysterious to you are automatically more interesting. Do you see that's kind of the rule of life? I can't even. There are no exceptions. The unknown uh, stares at us with more awe than we stare at our knowledge. So, how do we comprehend the extent and the influence of these programs, these cultural and social programs? And the first action one can take towards this self inquiry is to comprehend kind of the evolution of society. And in some sense, it's an impossible task if you want to, in a detailed manner, go about it, because there's been way too many human beings behaving on this planet in ways that many of it has not been documented. That means we can't. Sometimes you can't be sure about something because you don't have access to all the data. This is why it would kind of be impossible to find a formula, a scientific formula that explains the whole world, because there are kind of dark spots. There are, in some sense, unknown phenomena occurring. And this unknown is so unknown that our language has just been able to acknowledge a certain scope of it. In some sense, there will be the evolution of language as well in our civilization, which many people don't talk about, not even many instructors. I was kind of not disappointed, but I wondered why. Perhaps maybe I hadn't come across, but Noam Chomsky, this man who has a PhD in linguistics, he's an incredible mind, and I have wondered why it is not being discussed how the evolution of language is the evolution of psychology. It is the evolution of what people saw in the words before and see now. It is in some sense how reality enters the linguistic matrix of thought. If I ask you right now, tell me what you're thinking, you're going to see it's going to come in the form of language. Sometimes we think through images, sometimes we think through language, sometimes we think through witnessing. Sometimes it has nothing to do with an tangible aspect of reality. We're not trying to contain the world, we're just watching it as it happens. These states take one be kind of outside of the cultural and social program, because it shows you of an inner uniqueness that cannot be defined by the outer world. That means there's a way you are aware of yourself that no living being on this planet is aware. And so that has value. And that's where creativity is born, when your eyes are worth sharing. Now, when we look at society, when we look at culture, we see something very interesting. So, I acknowledge it in a way where I feel perhaps the Western mainstream does not. And the way I acknowledge it is that you see, as human beings gathered in the tribal dynamic, something interesting occurred. Human beings before did not have roles, did not have positions, were not part of a sort of familiar setting. As they began entering a sort of tribal dynamic, it became something interesting. For the first time, communication was being made aware of. People were becoming aware of what they said in public. People were becoming aware of how they behaved in public. They began to see right actions and wrong actions. Sometimes when you go see how words have developed, they have developed through a sort of evolution of cultural behavior. That means words kind of are there to explain our experiences, and before language there requires to be an experience of a world to even conceive language for. You see, it is a very interesting phenomenon. We have separated ourselves in such a way that sometimes I wonder, when I give these mystical talks, should I spare the illusion, or should I, in some sense, penetrate it? Should I try to transcend the veil of dualistic perception that I've been told to accept my whole life, or should I actually wonder? wonder about the unknown. So pretty much our relationship, your cultural and social program, how you have entered society, experienced the society, consciously and subconsciously defined the society for yourself. Um, it all plays a part in it. Kind of what I'm saying is how yourself is being treated in society has to do with how that sense of self saw society to be a behavioral pattern in. Trust me, like I've been in moments. I've been in like a lot of, not a lot of, but I could say like maybe plus over 15 embarrassing moments in my life. And these are kind of like these um really, I can, whenever I see inefficiency, I at least attain humor from it. When I fail, at least I laugh at the failure. You know, there's something to kind of see even in failure. So what I'm trying to get to is that our tribal existence, or how we as individuals eventually gravitated to one another, began becoming comfortable with each other's presence, and then began communicating, and then began building civilization, we began to see something very interesting. There's a very profound quote by Helen Keller where she says, "What we have once enjoyed, we can never lose. All that we love deeply becomes a part of us." And you see, I find the word love, or the concept of love, is an extraction from a collective phenomena. It's kind of like the wave is an emissary of the ocean, you know, even though it is not the whole of it. In some sense, we are a conscious wave in the unconscious ocean of nature. And in our temporary lifespan, the moment the human being was able to acknowledge its mortality, I'm going to say not even human being, because the humanity, to be human, is something that took us 4 billion years of evolution to kind of come into terms with. You see, we have evolved from a bewildered, kind of just unconscious movement of nature beast into a sort of civilized, conscious, free will, individualized, free will dictating kind of creature. We have, in some sense, not only just extracted, we have not just consumed food of on this planet, we have also consumed modes of experience which have learned, which have led to a sort of internal hierarchical kind of memory palace in some sense. In some sense, that there are various hierarchies, there's various senses of right and wrong that are stored in the mind, and in some sense, your sense of morality comes from the strength of your memory. You see, this is why they say sometimes when somebody does the wrong thing, it's not that they're bad, they just forgot to do the right thing, or they didn't remember to do the right thing. What that means is that our attentions are so important to study. Many teachers tell students in class, pay attention, but they don't even pay attention to attention. They never study how concentration is so important in this life. And concentration does not mean just focusing on something, because that's the engineering aspect. There's a reverse engineering mode in concentration, where it's as if in one way you're looking at something with a complex context behind your eyes, and there's a way of looking at something without any context. You just want to see what the object communicates before you assume from it. Pretty much you start walking in the world without too many assumptions and watching what happens. As this occurs, direct experience finds a rhythm. When it finds a rhythm, it's very playful. The egoic construct becomes its own, it starts cracking, it goes through a metamorphosis. It pretty much just like how the cells of the caterpillar die, and in some sense arise the cells of the butterfly as the last cell of the caterpillar fades. And or in some sense, it's very similar that we move from temporary individual conscious creatures into a sort of um, collective sort of uh, inseparable unconscious kind of state. That means pretty much we're evolving into rivers of conscious intelligence. You see, consciousness was never destined to just be in a physical body. It was destined to ride the waves. The ego is the surfboard until it takes you to the safe part of shore and you just swim. Do you see? So there's a difference between riding a wave and swimming in the ocean. One is more experientially engaged, the other has a certain construct of its experience. Do you see? This, in some sense, is a very profound notion because it means you're not the thought of you're having right now. You are you, and thoughts arise and come and go. When you understand this, you free yourself from image. You free your emotions become pure. Most people's emotions are impure. That means they are arising from either wanting to try to change the future or try to change the past. Their emotions don't arise from the present moment. When an emotion arises from a present moment, there is a sort of death of the egoic conception. This death of the egoic conception means the self that was in some sense playing a certain role in society, or being a sort of culturally programmed entity, as if culture and society sculpt the mind of the individual as it moves through it, you know. It's as if a heavenly being entered earth and asked people on earth why they weren't in a heavenly state. And it's like this very profound thing, guys, that only in, at least for me, only in, how can I tell you? Only in Vedic ancient Indian mythology, this idea I have seen to be present. And usually, what we see is that when the concept of divinity or God, let's entertain a religious context for a second. When you see the concept of a sort of God, or a sort of invisible hand that is not just the invisible hand in our economy, but the invisible hand that moves free will, as if your free will is actually the universe moving. In ancient Indian culture, there's a story that Rama was saying, and somebody asked Rama, "What is this path to enlightenment? What is this path to truth?" I think it was something like that. And Rama looked at the guy and he said, "Work." Or I don't know what exactly the question was, but Rama was kind of explaining the difference. Oh, I remember. Somebody asked Rama, what is the purpose of human life? And he said to work. But he didn't mean work like go start a business. He meant to be involved in the great work, which means the action of living and recognizing you have come here to be you. And you has a known aspect and an unknown aspect. And as you journey through this life, your loneliness is never you being lonely. It's you being left in the state of mind that you are then. So what I'm trying to say is that Rama tells the guy that this is why the human life is blessed, because in ancient Indian tradition, mythology, or we can say certain spiritual context, Rama said that lesser entities than the human being, beings in lesser dimensions and lesser skies, these beings are incapable. They are too part of nature to even know that they can be enlightened or know that they can be in another state. Okay, they're not conscious of their state. That's kind of hell. Whenever you lose control, you're like, oh shit, things are getting messed up. You see, that's hell, because the world is moving your free will more than your free will moving your world through conscious choices and efficient action, right? This doesn't mean you got to be obsessed with conscious action and mindfulness. I don't believe in that. I believe it's much more worth you being natural and sincere than you being behaviorally or culturally or whatever context robotic. So, anyways, Rama tells this dude who asked him like the point of what the value of human life, and Rama said that lesser entities, they are too busy, they're too caught in the cycles of desire and the animalistic loops of nature to be able to be liberated, to even be able to be aware of the question. And he said that the gods, the higher entities, are all receiving so much offerings, their minds are so instantly manifest, as if the higher dimensions are actually more evolved worlds, as if it's not just the ape that evolves and the world changes. The world evolves as well, but we cannot acknowledge it unless we are from the evolution of that world. That means sometimes the world is experiencing certain states that we as individual entities do not. Okay, what I mean by that is that it's more of like the ever-present mind. It's like as if we are thoughts in the mind of God, and in a certain thought that God has, as we entertain this context, like as in a certain thought God has, that's like the higher dimension. It abides by the way it was designed, not by the way of explanation. Not everything, at least in this universal sector, will relate, because as you kind of become more aware and move to the higher awareness of the higher dimensions, what occurs is that time's linear chronological way of occurring changes. So your mind begins oscillating between all real images of the past and all conceived images of the future. Your mind pretty much begins moving at a faster speed. As you concentrate, thoughts accelerate. As thoughts accelerate, eventually they will suddenly stop, like a balloon that just pops. As a balloon just suddenly pops, you suddenly experience waves of silence, but you begin to see that your subconscious is still moving. So, what that means in the deepest states of meditation, the subconscious of the person is acting as the God, which is their free will. So, in some sense, there's a complexity of depth when it comes to choice, but that's kind of moving a bit away from the topic. Anyways, Rama tells them the higher entities, the higher beings, they don't have to work. They're constantly being blessed by everything, so they never have a challenge. They have never a chaos to even wonder about the true nature of things. That means it is only in human life where the simulation can be stepped out. In higher dimensions, there's no need to step out of the simulation because there's no challenge, there's no chaos. In lower dimensions, it's so chaotic and challenged that that order is the only evolution, and even from order, there's nothing that can go further than that, because it's not we evolve beyond the dualistic mind. That's when the species kind of, I call it, moves beyond the language threshold. And in ancient mythology, the main idea I want to put a spotlight on is that gods ain't like gods, okay? Like very higher beings would come down to, in some sense, speak to certain wise sages in the mountain. I believe Rishi Vyasa was one of them. And it was very profound, because back in the day, just like how our ancestors were more wild and intense and a bit more able to play with the chaos, similarly now we're civilized, we don't behave that way. So our minds and our state of experience has in some sense shifted, as if the wilderness of our imagination has been taken away, just like how we went from nature into like cities, as we it chose, just like the story of Moses, the species walked towards the technological box rather than, the garden of flowers. And so, as we left the forest, we left our wilderness. We left environments where our intelligence was functioning at a certain intensity. But ancient times, that wilderness was alive. People died all the time. So there was incredible instant chaos confronting everybody. Everybody knew they could die in every moment. So that's why their imaginations were given ultimate freedom, because they were not afraid of nature's processes. There's a kind of serenity you can attain. Science can heal you if you have storified the world too savagely for yourself. It's all about a navigation of attention. This is why I don't care about belief systems that much. I challenge them. All these talks will appear as some sort of system of belief and ideology, but I am telling you, language is it's our greatest technology, but it is not us. So similarly, a lot of social and cultural programs has to do with the stories you're living throughout the day. These stories you live through are your programs. If you understand the world of it, you will know how to behave in the program. You know, if you live in a culture and be in that culture for a while, you will see enough behavior to comprehend what are the common behaviors. Do you see? And so this has been a challenge for many countries because we are kind of globalizing as a planet. You know, suddenly we're like I feel all of life is moving towards a global community of not just 8 billion and plus bodies, 8 billion minds, 8 billion visions that have the potential to integrate with an incredible efficiency. That it's as if all of us were paying attention to the efficiency of our civilization, do you know how quickly we would evolve? Do you know how much honesty evolves a civilization? That means if you put one, imagine like there were two Earths, okay? Two parallel realities of Earth. In one parallel reality of Earth, all creatures went towards dishonesty and lies, and they just liked the chaos's animation. And then in another reality, people went towards honesty. They're like, we have no time to be violent for no reason. Okay, we have to find the reasons to have peace because in peace, ingenuity grows. Innovation can step out of the shyness of the cruel world that it feels will doubt it. So in one reality, if all those beings were honest, they would attain an efficiency. Those human beings that are honest will come into communities, honest communities, where in these honest communities, it would be as if many birds are flying together. Just like how you see many birds synchronized flying or schools of fish under the water kind of synchronized swimming, what that means is that there has been a common rhythm acknowledged by all the species members, which has made them, which is the unique ability of their design. Right now, you're designed in a certain way. Soon you will come to realize your thoughts are designed also in a certain way. And as every day passes, a sort of old self fades and a new self arises. Old self fades and a new self arises. This sort of mental spectrum is efficient as an ego because our societies fundamentally now function based on ego. That means if I was to do something in society, I would require a name. I would require official evidence of a sort of identity. That identity is an individual position. The hardest thing about psychology, which some philosophers were very brave and wise, where they said that there is something about psychology that seems to be not too accurate. And some people said, "What is that?" Many psychologists were offended, and the answer was that one can analyze someone's psychology based on how much of their psychology is available. Okay? And that's the fear. That's the fear of miscommunication because communication is not something that's easy. It's kind of like the same mentality you have with the gym, you should have with communication. It's as if we cultivate abilities, they don't just suddenly happen. Our attention has to do the same activity for a while and be like, holy shit, I can do it now. And if you're street smart through a sort of if you have a sort of kind of saber-tooth alertness that your ancestors have, you will pick up things quick. You will see how the world is working. You will see the truth in the lies and the lies in the truth. You will see this. Once you get to that state of alertness, I consider that the equivalent to how our ancestors had to be aware of a saber-toothed tiger, like not saber-tooth, but like a tiger in the bushes and shit, right? So that's a very important point that there is this sort of evolutionary kind of being an individual entity paying attention to the environment and then being an individual entity paying attention to how the world is being. It's like your mind is oscillating from being you and then being everything including you. You see, your mind dances. It dances through classifications of a linguistic structure. This linguistic structure is kept in time, and that's why people say we have memories. Do you see? We are trying to remember all the ways we change, so time inevitably had to be a direct arrow. Time has to go forward because stuff change, and we're trying to create some sort of reference for our memory. You see, there's two ways you can treat your intelligence. Either your mind will, how would I say it? It's like you go looking for your true self and suddenly comprehend the true world. And as you see, before you find your true self, you have seen the ways the universe is present. Sometimes as you evolve your world, so does your self evolve, and that's the contribution of any pretty much why human beings speak. When you look at TED Talks, what do we see? The world of one speaker, through the potential of their mind and their ability to speak, is being shared with others. As it is being shared with others, suddenly there's this sort of evocation of one's own endeavor. So sometimes, like, somebody is talking about like a science fiction thing they wrote, and suddenly you get a vision for a book that you never thought you could write. The mind is incredible. It has unknown aspects and known aspects. When the unknown goes above 90%, that's when you would be at the end of experiencing synchronicity. Your intuition would be you at that point, and you will eventually move into selfless ways of how the world is kept, and you will attain some sort of moksha, enlightened samadhi. You see, samadhi is awareness. In Vedanta, there was a sentence where they said, there was a word, they say Satchit Ananda, which I really like it, you know? And Satchit Ananda means conscious existence is bliss. It's a very interesting place. It's one of those things where I at least the way this, at least the topic of this episode kind of came about for me was I was walking in society, and suddenly somebody needed help. I helped them, and the way I communicated and the way they communicated seemed culturally and socially like uh, uh, proper ways of behavior. It seemed like conditioned reality at its best. Okay? Sometimes when somebody is being fake or somebody is lying in front of you, that's augmented reality, ladies and gentlemen. That's virtual reality. It is as real as it is fake, and it is as fake as it is real. I find that evolution meant that the world in our eyes is changing based on the world outside of our eyes, which fundamentally means our free will is the world's movement, not us. We are our own illusions that have tried to capture ourselves and contain ourselves in words and language. If I asked you who you are right now, if I asked you who you are right now, you would give me an answer. You know, imagine you in a job interview, somebody says, "Tell me about your life experience," and I'll be like, "Buddy, how can I, tell you 27 years of different ways my attention alertness has evolved?" And of course you give the appropriate answer. Sometimes people don't have really questions. They are trying to express emotions. They're trying to release emotions. I see this especially in the youth. I saw it in myself and I see it in others. It is this moment where the person is acknowledging, like they're choosing to be individual. They're like, I got it. I'm an independent person. I got this. I'm me. I got it. I'll succeed. That whole kind of like warrior mentality. Eventually, the warrior that has fought the world will come into a moment where it will recognize it is the only one holding the sword. Imagine being a warrior on a battlefield and you're the only one who has a sword. The decision you make will choose whether the chaos embraces you or the order of the universe. And for me, to live for life is the only way you can live for life. The only way to be truly immortal is to live for the value of this 4 billion-year-old science project called humanity. There is nothing greater than the ability of the future. I am telling you. Our lives are our own show. We can tolerate the lack of evolution, you know? That means if we were to live as if we were 10,000 years in the future, would you be you? Do you see the fascinating thing? Do you see this fascination that as we move towards the future, we in some sense constantly are evolving, not through a sort of physical sense of existence, soon to incorporate technological means, but also a non-physical sense of existence, a sort of abstract evolution of various ways the mind has been alert enough to acknowledge identity and the move of language in one's awareness. You see, as I'm speaking right now, I can hear my own words. In the moment that occurs, the mind has a simultaneous kind of like infinity symbol coming to the center kind of loop at it. What that means is I play with duality. When I play with duality, I can only do it when I am non-dual. So for me, the evolution of just human psychology seems to occur from a non-dual state, that fresh childhood blank slate kind of mind, and then eventually it becomes complex because more waves of data are hitting the child. Every person that speaks to the child is shaping the child's vision. Any story the child hears will, in some sense, will shape the child's subconscious. You see, this is why it's kind of a universal responsibility to free your universal sector from illusion, and not an illusion where you're saying like, "Oh, that's like," I'm not trying to evoke any sort of mob mentality. I believe the future revolutions are not external, they're internal. You have to rebel against the ideas that you are not what you have been believing you are. And you can only do that through the strength of a clear mirror. That means when you become more interesting than any teacher in this world, that's when your attention, imagination, and the value of self evolves into the value of the world. And in some sense, I could tell you, we don't have to have too much of a responsibility either. Let me tell you why. Because technology has not evolved that far. That means even though we all have phones and various ways, our deepest realities and true ways we're feeling and experiencing the world are not shared. It's still this artificial kind of like edifice of social media language that we're still walking through. For me, the mind has to attempt to break itself. And that was the most profound moment in my life. When I realized I am not who I think I am. Because I am not a thought. For a long time, guys, I thought I was a thought. That's why I didn't care about thoughts. Because the thought finds itself comfortable in a pattern. That means if the simulation is so comfortable, why do you want to even step out of it, man? What's the problem? That's the sad part of technology, that it will create a fake heaven when there's a real one here that we could have built. I find that these social cultural programs are moving towards chaos. So pretty much when I look at human behavior, especially in regards to a sort of economic existence, there's competition, and thus the moment there's competition, you don't care for your fellow man because your fellow man is trying to beat you at something. Okay, and that's the issue. There's still the violence has been constantly throughout the decades, throughout the years, been becoming internalized. First we killed one another in the battlefield, now we're just like beating each other in like esports or something. Like in chess or like in dialogues in the United Nations. Like you see, our wars went from an external value into an internal linguistic value. This is why I say Sometimes imagine a country that in some sense had a language where the concept of war didn't exist. As if that country was like, we don't care about any belief, we just care about efficiency and inefficiency. Okay? And efficiency is something to be respected. That means nations should not be just treated as places for people to go to. They should be treated as structures where it's as if like the friend that is helping you, you must help that friend. The person that helps you in this world, you must help. Let me tell you why. If you don't, your mind will move towards a subconscious anarchy. You will feel you won't deserve many moments in life. That's the problem. So for me, there's two ways. There's not two ways, but there's different ways. Well, you can say a child's intelligence is based on how strong they are to accept their loneliness, which will mean to accept a universal condition. We're all born individually, and in some sense, we leave this world individually. That means have fun with your species, have enjoy, like have a toast of celebration with with your human comrades on this battlefield, but understand it's a solo journey. The mind has started from an individual position, hence it will acknowledge loneliness. Loneliness is what is making it feel it is one. It's what is making it feel it's individual. There have been many times in society and various cultural situations where my decisions and behaviors, they have made a choice. They have made a choice whether I want to be true to myself or true to the system that I have entered temporarily. And when I was younger, I didn't care about my own truths, so I wasn't being true to myself. I just wanted to win, but this winning had no purpose. Even if I had won, I wouldn't care about it because it wasn't something, the real thing that I wanted it. Right? Sometimes when you see a person can't stop, let's say, an addiction, if when they can't stop an external addiction, it's not that sometimes it's only external problem. It's that it's the internal problem. It is how they have accepted the world to be that is making them feel they are constantly in need of a sort of repetitive mode of being. It's very funny. If we do the same thing in a loop, in a program, if you live a program every day, you will feel dead inside. If you do the same, like how can I tell you? Externally, repetition will feel like a sort of decay, and internally, it will feel like a decay. I don't know who it was, but some ancient philosopher said something like habit is the decay of the mind. And he didn't mean every habit. It just meant that if you don't explore more than what you are currently knowing, you haven't understood what the meaning of life is. Sometimes the meaning of life is not something you're constantly like searching for. It is something where in your authentic engagement it opens up to you. As your real eyes are found, so is the real world there already. There's a very profound story of this ancient rishi named Rishi Vyasa. And Rishi Vyasa, I personally have a very, I feel I could know how he looked at the world. And Rishi Vyasa has this story where he was by this river, and suddenly there comes this angelic revelation, as if from the higher realms of his mind, a voice, how would I say it? The story says an angel through another person comes to him and tells him, Rishi Vyasa, your existence in this life will in some sense be fulfilled. In some sense, once you write, I don't remember exactly how it was, like write the truth or something. Okay? And pretty much Rishi Vyasa goes on this endeavor where, kinda evoked by angelic vision, he in some sense begins writing these 18 very unique books back in the day on leaves. This dude was writing like content on leaves back in the day. You know what that means? That's before people were reading books, okay? And so in that sense, he's writing this stuff and he creates the 18 Puranas. But at the end of this, he's still not satisfied, as if he has explained the secrets to the efficiency of all social and cultural hierarchies and systems. Yet he feels unfulfilled. He feels he has made his masterpiece, yet he's not done. And it's in that moment where suddenly the angel comes to him and through another person and tells them, you must write about your devotion and love of God. So check this out, guys. This guy who went towards the peak of the evolution of the intellect came to realize what the intellect always subconsciously knew it was missing. And suddenly he's told to write about his love of the universe. And in some sense, revelations come to him and he lands those revelations. Rishis are pilots of consciousness, yogis are pilots of consciousness. They navigate phenomena and the vision of phenomena in their awareness as their awareness. And so Rishi Vyasa, I believe he writes the Bhagavad Gita, or it's the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he writes this ancient story, this great epic of Arjuna, and this conversation between a man and God, and his love for civilization and for the world, because you cannot avoid the world, ladies and gentlemen. You can be cruel to people. You know, I find it very hilarious when religious people are cruel to others. Let me tell you why. Because they have failed to see what God has made. They have worshipped the thought of God rather than seeing the existence of life and its importance of freedom. So in some sense, I have said in other talks, there's a war of language going on. This war of language is the war of beliefs. Just walk on a busy street and look at the signs, and you will see marketing is people trying to invite you to certain rooms of seeing reality. I had a sales job, strangely, and it was like a sales job, but it wasn't. It was donations for Red Cross, and I would go door to door, and I would very honestly tell them about the program, and some people were interested, some people weren't. But it was a very interesting situation that language from nothing begins generating structure first to the context of the world, then the concept. Sometimes, if you notice the way I speak, some people might immediately be like, okay, this is not going from concept A to concept B to concept C, because in the middle I am trying to build the context. You see, that's how you kind of pilot communication. The communication can be acknowledged by the audience to be in a world that you're actually seeing. You see, that's the power of communication. It is a bridge between the inner dimensions of human beings. Um, so pretty much to kind of give more of a shape to the context of this talk, I'm trying to bring your attention, dear listener, to how our behavior is layered in many ways that we have conceived the world to be. Some of them based on our past sense of memory, if we have a linear experience of time, some of them based on how we visualize the future to be. That means when a human being, as you're walking in the street, you see another human being making a decision, they're making that decision is the conclusion of where their attention has moved to. Are they inspired to behave because they want to change the past, or are they inspired to behave because they want to bring the future. And it is very important, because in life there's two ways that it can tend to communicate, and eventually it becomes repetitive, so you automatically go into an enlightened state because you've seen it before. You see, your eyes have been open as intelligence, raw intelligence. Now, I found it very fascinating that if we see our world is the extension of another world, if we see we are like this tree of life in this universal sector or solar system, and we suddenly see that the roots of our existence, or the roots of the laws of the universe, go where we cannot see, we will feel that all we can do is appreciate the artwork, even though we tried the ultimate exploration. For me, when I see the ambitions of science, technology, mathematics, engineering, what I begin to see is like these units of, like, just like a Star Wars battleships leaving the main headquarters. And as they are, it's as if science is choosing to use knowledge as a weapon to attack the unknown. Religion is using what it knows as a shield from the unknown. It wants to do what God wants, to go to God where God wants. It pretty much, the religious mind has no need for their own mind. That's not a tragedy. It is a tragedy if you don't see anything else. Life is too dynamic to be defined in a static way, and it's, believe it or not, too static to be defined in a dynamic way. So we are oscillating between these modes of perception, and I think pretty much it happens. Heaven and hell are not just based on man's beliefs and religious revelation, they're also based on the hemisphere of the brain. That means in certain mystical circles, they acknowledge the devil not actually as the devil, but as a metaphor for duality, for a separation of the ultimate. So, in some sense, one can say religion can be seen in the same context as the story of Big Bang. I'm telling you, because both of them have an ignition to the universe, but they have, one has the ignition through an emotional allowance, the other doesn't. Science doesn't care about emotions, it cares about truth and facts. Okay, but religion cares about emotions, because your emotions dictate your morality, and your morality is leads to your how you're going to be judged. Do you see? That means the moment you bring a sort of uh, judgment system to the cosmos, your morality sets in. You see? When you feel nobody is watching, usually we choose to do chaotic things. You see? But when people are watching, that chaotic side shuts down into a sort of ordered performance. And the biggest question is, I remember me and my brother and my father, we were visiting Iran for the summer in 2016, and we went to this place, and we spoke to the mayor of a town that was a bit, more in the distance in the Shomal area. And I remember it was this guy who seemed like a very like educated person with like he had a briefcase. He seemed to be very academic, and he was the mayor of this kind of like not so evolved town. And so when we went there, and it was like I remember my father wanted to build a huge like resort there, you know. And as we went and spoke to the mayor, and as me and my brother waited, and my father finished talking to the mayor, eventually I think it was my brother. He asked a very incredible question, and my brother asked the guy, "What do you think society needs?" And it was an incredible question, because the guy suddenly got shocked, and in some sense suddenly had this like had to think of a real answer. And we're all sitting there, and I remember that his answer was honesty. He said honesty. He said he didn't say it actually, he just said honesty, but like the way I took what he said was he meant that dishonesty is the inefficiency of our civilization. It's what's keeping it back. People have not understood the value of living honest lives, so their desires have become this chaotic freedom in dishonest ways. Honesty has no limits. Good doesn't have an image. Bad doesn't have an image, for they are states of mind which produce the image. You don't understand how important your attention is. Your attention is your savior from your problem, any situation you're in. And you choose how you stand in life, which means you choose how you dress the cosmos up in meaning. You don't know. It's kind of like these cultural social programs are cages of our natural intelligence, because we have to abide your intelligence relating to its authentic self. It relates to the inauthentic kind of external environment, right? As if you see, it's very funny when you look at soldiers in an army. The soldiers are pawns, and they have chosen to be pawns. They could be engineers, doctors. Back in the day in World War II, when there were wars, everybody had to go. It was like you had to protect nations against the disagreement of people. It's incredible, because all wars have started in the minds of men. And what dwells in the minds of men? It is images and language. And these images and this language is the cause of war. How human beings spoke caused war. What human beings saw caused war. And their inability to find the efficient path. Because let me tell you, we haven't been scared enough as a civilization. If we were scared enough, if we had some kind of independence movie situation where there was one big threat occurring to all human beings, we would instantly forget about racism, political correctness, sexism, and all the other isms, that are discriminating. And so we would forget about that, and we would be like, okay, our species is in the face of extinction. Now, who chooses to go to their desires and live a luxurious life, and who dares, walk into this battlefield? For me, that's the point of life, to give it a try. Because you fall into many interpretations. An action could mean something at a certain age, then at another age it could mean something. There were many ways I used to see myself a few years ago. I would look at my childhood and I would be like, what a foolish kid I was. Then years later I began to see, oh my God, what a wise kid I was. Like suddenly it kept changing, and this constant change of thought made me realize we are not thoughts, but we live through them subjectively. Language. We live through language subjectively. So we not only have to study like, think of it this way. Somebody comes and says, tell me spirit, like, to these enlightened gurus back in the day, people would come and be like, yo man, tell me spiritual truth. And the guru would look at the man and he's like, what kind of truth are you looking for? And then the guy for the first time begins to think, oh my God, there's different types of truth. And then the guru would say something in the sense that, no, but it's like, how important is your question for you? Or are you just a creature of emotional linguistic expression? Where are the ideas going? And when someone begins to speak about the world, they will eventually recognize patterns. Just like patterns of speech, there is patterns of behavior. There's patterns of decision making. There's patterns of results. History repeats itself because we created history. We began, our ears began preserving stories that held within them great visionary value. Guys, I think I'm going to retitle this episode as "Waking Up from Social and Cultural Programs." Waking up from social and cultural programs, because that's an interesting approach. Because when you wake up from something, you're usually going from imperfection to perfection. Sometimes your certainty is something to be perfected. That means just like a scientist can't be sure God exists because there's no evidence, you know? It's as if like it's as if you can truly evolve as a being and as an entity when the freedom of the inner reality and the outer reality are one and the same. Once you realize the inseparability of the individual activity and the cosmic activity, a supernova explosion happens of a realization. This supernova explosion of a realization is suddenly you realizing, just like how the, again, as Plato would say, as above, so below, what's beyond is similar to what's now because it's all one thing. You begin to see all the separations in your life being ways you divide at the moment. Honestly, speech is art because one has to generate it. There's a quote from Buckminster Fuller I want to share. I just gotta find it. Buckminster Fuller. His name is even, you know, there's nothing fuller than his name, you know. Buckminster Fuller has this quote where he says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Pretty much, you like, if you have a problem and you have an approach to that problem and that approach is not enough to solve the problem, you have to understand that you have to forget this old approach model, and you have to, in some sense, how can I say it, you have to, you build through new data a new self that does not problem, or in some sense has accomplished the problem and solved it, as if you physically go and actually solve it, you understand. So this you can say outer activism is like external movement. Inner activism is just more watchfulness of how reality is taking place as intelligence. That means it's very fascinating. I can totally agree that I'm a biological physical entity. Like right now, I have a body. I'm speaking to you through the biological design of a human being. However, where these words are coming from and how this animated biology moves and compared to nature, it seems to be there seems to be some sophisticated uh, as if there was something that occurred to one species that didn't happen to other species, okay? And I believe that was the spark of a subjective evolution. That means we suddenly became multidimensional, we became thoughts to ourselves. We became separate from the world to be in thought. As if the lion that thought it was a sheep could look into the pond and suddenly see it's a lion. But it would then see to be a lion, to be an individual, is in some sense kind of like it requires the awareness prior. So there's always a pre-thought state of just watching, you know? Okay, so I think everything I've been saying might not have been recorded. Anyways, guys, I guess I'm going to end it here. Hopefully the live stream was uninterrupted so far. Pretty much there's many ways that we behave, and these behaviors tend to follow certain social values or cultural values. But beyond these social and cultural programmed ways of being a person in the world, there is a real you amongst this. This real you doesn't have to do with how you are trying to constantly adjust to an external condition. It is when the inner condition and the outer condition, it's as if your inner condition no longer gets changed by the outer. As if anything that occurs externally, it's kind of like how Ramana Maharshi said, let what come, let what goes, let what goes go, let what comes come, let what goes go, see what remains. You kind of find yourself in that position, and that's when both the inner and outer hostility ends. There was a very profound Tibetan master named Sogyal Rinpoche, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something like, "Until you can't conquer anger, your enemies will be inexhaustible." That means internally, if you're frustrated, the outer frustration will not go away. You can sit on any chair, you'll still be frustrated. You see, so we have to, for the first time in our evolution, pay attention to the wonders of our inner being. And the wonders of our inner being are left to our own exploration. And there's two things you can do. You either buy into a belief, you either go into a sort of conceptual shelter for the time being, like a bunker, or you step out and actually explore life and eventually find what many writers have said to be your writer's voice, or you can see it as the kind of logos, as the inner, uh, this sort of universal inner wisdom. The ancient Greeks called it the logos. And this logos for the New Age community, it's so hilarious. It's become like, angels and aliens. And logos has been given many masks, but those who are wise don't give it a mask. They understand energy doesn't need to be per se shaped, because then the concept of energy wouldn't exist. Sometimes when you give a face to an invisible entity in your mind, you in some sense